Yeah, yeah.
Great. Hi, I'm John with Broadsheet, and you're watching Tomorrow Tonight, which is in fact recorded on Saturday morning, January the 23rd, which is today, this morning today. We're joined by human rights lawyer David Langwallner, who unfortunately we got cut off from last night. David, hello, how are you?
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. I have a slightly unstable internet connection. Now, David had an excellent column in yesterday's broadsheet based on Daniel Defoe's Year of the Plague, sort of a
Yeah.
homage, a reworking, a retooling. So we're going to have a look at that
And
in
a super picture and retitling of it by your good offices and your artwork team. And so
Thank
I'm
you.
very pleased when it came out.
Yeah, it looks really good. So we're going to have a look at that in a second, but let's have a look at this morning's papers, which we did last night, but we
Yeah.
got truncated. 1 second. Okay. And we've all the papers in, which is unusual because we don't really have them in the evening, all of them, when we do the night show. Irish Examiner, David, anything there that...
Well, I said in our broken connection last night, I mean, my mother came from Cork, and there's a kind of very mixed views about Cork people. I shouldn't say that perhaps. But the one good thing about Cork people is they tend to focus on the particular. And if you notice the headline in the Examiner, it's vaccine delivery delayed. There is all sorts of stuff about this now. Everybody will be vaccinated by September. How is the vaccine going to cope with the various variants and mutants that are developing? How many people are going to get it? These are very treacherous times. We've got to be very careful of the level of information we're getting about both the efficacy of the vaccine and the supplies of the vaccine and what it's going to do.
Okay. This is Besborough. This is the mother and baby home, former mother and baby home in Cork. Past Besborough resident to sue state, HSE and nuns.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's necessary at this stage. There hasn't been, yes, there has been a degree of atonement, but there were various paper-up reports. McAleese was involved in one, not President McAleese, but her husband.
Yep.
And judicial-led inquiries created settlements, perhaps dubious. I think people need to have justice and their day in court. And I think there will be a limitation problem question. I wonder how that will work, actually, because, of course, much of this was a long, long time ago. But
it's a
there is no statute or such prosecutions. Yeah.
And we don't have the availability of class action lawsuits in Ireland, which is a great pity.
Well, the Supreme Court have been ludicrous in their interpretation of standing and locus standi criteria, and they don't sanction an actio popularis, which is effectively a fancy Latinism for a class action or a group action. But there is also a limitation point in terms of, I would imagine, in terms of how long it was ago. Maybe the court of public opinion is perhaps the best way to get some justice and recompense.
Okay, I must ask you later why we don't have a class action lawsuit available as a sort of legal remedy, because these individual cases, that's what's happened here in this instance.
Why don't we have a class action? Yeah, well, the constitutional criteria for standing, which is locus standi, which is your entitlement to take a case, have been interpreted in a very narrow fashion by the Irish judicial system. You have standing if you are affected, if your interests are affected or about to be affected. There is an element where you can create group standing, but that does not really translate into an actio popularis or a popular action on behalf of. I mean, I would have thought a way around it would be to join a number of plaintiffs.
Okay, well, let's move on. The Irish Times, very nice photograph of the first Sikh in the Garda Reserves.
Yes, and this time, hopefully, he's allowed to wear his turban because, of course, Faulkner Murphy, the former Garda commissioner, banned a Sikh reservist from wearing a turban. Now, I mean, in fairness to Faulkner Murphy, I think it was something to do with that police officers should be neutral
Oh,
in
this is
terms
the
of the way they
same.
come across.
Yeah, this is the same gentleman who had been told he could not wear it.
All right, so he's been allowed to wear.
He is, yeah.
Well, it's very intrinsic. It's very intrinsic to the Sikh religion. It's the hair as a covering it up as a sacred object. And I don't think anyone would remotely be offended by someone wearing a turban. Obviously, it may be the case that if he has to go into a very definitive security-driven situation where he has to do riot policing or something like that, he would presumably put some sort of helmet over his turban to protect himself.
Yeah, but
I don't see anything remotely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, also the fact that the hair is extremely long, so I mean, it would be impractical to wear it without the turban. In fact,
well, I mean, everybody's gone mad about the expression of religious identity. There have been all of these cases in the European Court of Human Rights about crucifixes. And if you're an air stewardess, where can you wear them? Can you wear them overtly? Well, why should people be offended by a crucifix? I mean, if you're wearing it or anything else. And I think, expression of people's cultural and religious identity, as long as it does not trespass on any level of infliction onto others or offensiveness, should be upheld and justified throughout the system. And I find restrictions in these things, like the French banning the burqa and the hijab, deeply offensive.
Okay.
And I don't come from the standpoint of a very religious person.
Yeah, that was Sarkozy, wasn't it? I mean, it was very provocative sort of ban. Tighter restrictions on travel and quarantine expected next week. David?
Yeah, closing time. There's an old book by John, is it Graham Swift, called Closing Time. It was a headline in The Economist. I mean, there's no doubt that globalization, travel, except remotely, is becoming a thing of the past. And why would you want to as well if you've got to quarantine at point of exit and quarantine at point of return? So it is an assertion ab necessitas, of necessity of national autarky and the closing of the borders. Of course, that is very dangerous, but is it proportionate or necessary? Is there a quantifiable emergency? That's the point.
Okay, David, just moved on to the Irish Independent on Saturday. Passengers to face 5-day quarantine in hotel. Passengers arriving into Ireland held in quarantine, may be held in quarantine in hotels. This has happened I think in Australia, in Queensland, but they were...
Yeah, well, Queensland's a very right-wing place.
Yeah.
Always has been. Extreme right-wing place. I mean, look, you're not going to get people travelling into the country to play golf in Kerry or visit Connemara or whatever in terms of the tourist trade from the Americans or from anybody else if they have to have a 5-day quarantine.
I don't think it's particularly practical.
It is poison.
Yeah, David, I just want to give you the Taoiseach said you could be in quarantine until you get a test after 5 days that proves to be negative. Now, it's all may and could and what, but also this week the PCR tests were the WHO, World Health Organization, rode back on the number of false positives the tests are giving. Irish Daily Mail.
Well, there's also a question we addressed in the last podcast: questions of consent. Why should you be forced to take a test?
Well,
so there's a certain air of unreality about it.
Yeah, the Irish Daily Mail blow to vaccine rollout. This is what the Examiner called the vaccine delay. Taoiseach rules out closing border lockdown to continue until March. UK strain of virus is more deadly. And deliveries of game changer jab cut.
Yeah, that was reported. It was reported that the Kent variant, as it's called, because it began in this neck of the woods, how I don't know, is 30% more fatal. That was certainly the report, I think, in one of the English newspapers today. And of course, the incidences in Ireland are getting out of control. I think Ireland is now the highest rate of infection in world terms. How that translates to deaths, I don't know. But certainly, any perception that the mutant strain, with mutant strains to come, perhaps, is under control has been negated by events.
Okay, Taoiseach Micheál Martin is talking exclusively to the Irish Sun this morning with the bombshell that lockdown is hard on all families. He opens up on COVID stresses.
Yeah, well, perhaps he could do something. Politicians are full of sentiments and meaningless banalities. Perhaps if lockdown is hard on all families, he might consider the following. 1, a rent and eviction moratorium. 2, a level of state subvention and support. 3, protection of people's housing rights. 4, proper resourced healthcare system. And 5, perhaps he might not consider, in league with the corporations and the big banks, funneling money out of the country to Canadian and American vulture funds. Sentiments are all one thing. Leadership is something different. It involves tangible, specific acts.
So there. That's
right. I mean,
care centres in crisis in the evening.
I mean, how?
Sorry, David?
Well, I mean, it is a hallmark of a society always, and its level of civilization, to what extent it takes care of the young, the vulnerable, the elderly. And there was an incident in Britain where, over the Christmas period, I can't remember where, 100% of the people in the care home died or got COVID. I think they may even have died. And when people are in care centres, we have marginalised them almost by definition. Now, there may be good reasons as to why they're in care centres, but things happen in those sort of places which are not subject to the normal levels of scrutiny, which they should be. And it is, again, a devaluation of human life. I mean, Lord Sumption said something recently which I thought was totally outrageous, and he was upbraided for it, rightly so, with this woman who had serious cancer, and he indicated to her, your life is less valuable when someone's longer to live. Well, it's completely wrong, in that all human life, metrics aside, and to think in terms of metrics is wrong as valuable. More to the point, the question becomes, what is value? Is value purely assessed in economic terms? Say, for example, you had an 83-year-old Nobel Prize scientist who was still as brilliant as ever. It was an irresponsible but typical remark in terms of the way he looks at things.
Okay.
But again, it is the vulnerable that need to be protected.
Okay, high-speed broadband comes to Shanbally. You'd be delighted to hear 20, 30 years after the creation of the internet.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, well, maybe they might decide now to reject it, given the damage that the internet has done.
Well,
And good.
This is the Irish Field. You're not a racing man, I know. Is Irish racing secure? Burns doping scandal raising many questions.
People sometimes assume, I grew up in Leopardstown, but I think I've been to Leopardstown races 2 or 3 times in my life, and I've only once, this makes me a very untypical Irishman, once ever had a bet on a horse where I backed Red Rum successfully for the Grand National. That shows my age. I mean, sport of kings, some say. I mean, personally, I think the people who are part of the horsey mindset are not my cup of tea, which is not to say, of course, that the Irish bloodstock and horsing industry isn't world famous and is one of our few industries. So to that extent, it should be protected and supported.
Yeah, well, it seems to be getting a bit of a dent in its public image there. The Daily Telegraph, the mutant strain more deadly with apocalyptic-looking masked lady there. Same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think what's more interesting, if you scroll up to the Telegraph to the very top of the byline on the newspaper, if you just go back to the Telegraph's.
Sure, I've got that.
There.
Yeah.
I think there's something No, that's the Irish Racing Post. But
No, had the one.
it's just going to how the 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's I've read the story. It's extraordinary stuff. They're bringing in chefs to deliver their top food to them, a bit like something out of Fawlty Towers. They're developing new hobbies and buying lots of things, and it seems like jolly japes for a lot of them. Now, it's a very important point. I don't know if the Telegraph given its political complexion, wanted to make that point. But the implication, of course, if you were an objective reader looking at this, is, well, what happens to the 99% of the frontline workers who are dying of COVID and the people that have to go into the public service business and contracting the infection, or the people who are living in shared or so COVID, I mean, there's a book on emergency powers and COVID and pandemics that was recently published by a Bristol academic. And he said, unlike other emergencies, we're not demonizing another, but we are in a way, because the emergency is demonizing the poor. It's having a disproportionate impact on those who are poor, those who are disadvantaged, and those who are vulnerable. And that Telegraph story says that by implication. I don't think they intended to say it by implication, but it does.
Yeah, the Daily Express, we're tired of waiting for you, Mr. Bond. That's an aged photo of Daniel Craig. This movie just keeps on getting. It's about its It's about its theatrical release, and I guess they just want to wait. They want to wait until COVID is over. They say October.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think, if we're being pop culture about it, I do think Daniel Craig is the best James Bond since Sean Connery. But having said that, no one is Connery, who died recently, of course. And Craig's incarnation of Bond has led to at least some decent films, I think. Whereas, but not quite Goldfinger or Thunderball, even allowing for the rampant chauvinism of the time. These are masterpieces of pop culture. So I'm ambivalent about the Bond industry. I mean, it wouldn't be my cup of tea necessarily, but I'd check out the odd Bond film.
Yeah, well, this is his last Bond movie, I think, Daniel Craig. I think he was interesting to begin with, and then he just looked like a kind of very angry, squaddy kind of, for the last three, just very.
Yeah, he's got a kind of rough and ready quality to him. I suppose that's what evokes Connery as well. Connery came from a kind of working class Scottish background that kind of shows the uber sophistication of someone like Roger Moore was more what Ian Fleming envisaged, I think. But it is what it is, you know.
Moving on.
I'm rather watching a really political film, really.
Okay, more vaccine boo. We have a shortage of jabs. There's jabs on its. It's just kind of nonsense, really, isn't it? The vaccine thing, the distribution. It seems unnecessarily complicated and.
Yeah, but I mean, it's going to the non-distribution meeting the new mutants for whatever reason is creating a state of almost perpetual emergency. And what really worries me about this is not only the effects on livelihoods and jobs and dehumanization and mental health deterioration, but the basic effect in human rights that we're all in a permanent state of emergency. And one wonders, shouldn't they be getting their finger out and doing something more quick about this? Because,
well, I mean,
or the consideration we just have to altered universe and work within the virus, even though it is going to cause potential risk damage and, someone of my age,
but David,
perhaps much worse.
You're a human rights lawyer, so perfectly placed to discuss this, but yet you have a fear of the pandemic that is it's palpable that you would give up rights.
I don't think I have the same sort of fear some people think I should have, and I've been physically appearing in courtrooms, whereas colleagues have not. And I do think, and I've gone on record as saying, I think the pandemic is a hyperinflated crisis, and it's suiting all sorts of agendas.
Well,
And
yeah, David,
I have also gone on record of on many occasions cars that become embedded. They're very dangerous. And this is not good for human rights at all. Liberty, movement, privacy, all sorts of things under massive siege. And the thing about emergencies is they're often subjectively assessed based on the perception of a reality that doesn't really exist, or an asymmetry of information.
but David,
But
your
personally, in
perception,
terms of politics.
yeah, yes,
So if
David.
they're saying it is an emergency, well, one has to question both the extent of the emergency it supposedly is,
But
and
David,
the level
if
of proportionality in
but David,
response.
if you,
And also, as you
David,
correctly point out, you know,
okay,
the simple ineptitude, or whatever it is, or lies or deceptions of not rolling out a vaccine so there can be some sort of return. Hi, John, we got cut off there briefly.
yeah, I think it's still recording. Hopefully, I think so. We've got about 5
Did you
minutes
get
left.
the last bit?
Yeah, we got. I got you. I heard you on the last bit,
Okay.
David. It's just. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, forgive me. The internet connection here is desperately bad.
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
You can hear me now, yeah. Just to say that.
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you very well. Yeah, don't worry.
Okay,
Okay, let's close up then.
okay, sure.
With the excuse me.
I'm now seeing.
Huh?
I'm
It's a
now seeing Broadsheet. That's the newspaper. I'm now seeing your entity.
okay. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with the internet here, but it's so. Yeah, I just think that David, you talk about the mutant strains. You take it that very, not literally. Why wouldn't you? But when you talk of those mutant strains, it sounds like we're in some kind of horror movie. And then on the other hand, you're saying, what about human rights? But well, if there's these deadly mutant strains, surely that abnegates any kind of individual human rights. Would that be enough?
Hold on. Perhaps I wasn't crystal clear there, John. The mutant strains may create the context where this type of virus is a permanent feature. But that does not mean that we have to be in a permanent state of emergency to deal with it. In other words, the virus may become embedded in our social structure, but there has to be elements of proper levels of governance, livelihood earning, protection of human rights, living with mutant strains.
Okay.
It is not a case that I think it is this horror story, but it's certainly been built up to be one. You know,
Okay.
What is a horror story is the way that people are living in these abusive conditions.
Yeah, well,
or working with them.
Okay, well, we've got about a minute left, so quickly, if we can. Google threatens to hold search engine in Australia over pay for news dispute. This is the Australian, I guess the Supreme Court or High Court or whatever have ruled that they can't aggregate the news. They've got to pay for it. Google have got to pay for news. So
yeah.
It would be a bit like we would have to pay for every link that we made back to the Irish Times or the Irish Independent or whatever.
Oh, I know, it's a hyperlink thing. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of decisions on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the point about it is, it shows the unaccountability of these oligopolical capitalist entities, the Googles, the Facebooks of this world. It's reached the point that if a legal decision goes against them, they just say, we're going to flout it, ignore it, or decamp.
Yeah.
Stuff
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I mean, that's
they are an unaccountable. Sorry?
that's Ireland's issue. Effectively, if we were to increase the tax rate, they would be gone. I mean, it wasn't. There was never. They were never here for the rain and the dancing girls. You know, it was.
Yeah, and they were also never here for, I mean, the Apple judgment is still on appeal, so we may lose it, but they were also never here for the growth of the Irish economy. They're for the growth of their own assets and that are factored out into their own offshore bank accounts. We have put them on the bank balance of Ireland's ledger of sustained economic growth, and none of it has gone to the Irish people. It's all been gone out of the country. But as we've denuded our manufacturing base, as we're now in danger of losing our tourism and public and hospitality trade, they're about the only thing that sustains the paltry lubricants of the Irish economy together. But that, of course, is even more dangerous because it gives them more leverage and more power to do what they want. Okay,
the Daily Star, Corrie and Emmerdale's filming suspended. You'd be crestfallen to hear that, David, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of, why have they suspended? Because they're sociable entities. So you mean you have to film in, well, Emmerdale's out in farm.
I think it's probably impossible to.
People have to be out and about.
Probably impossible to socially distance and put the thing together, maybe. I think Fair City.
Yeah.
Still going on. I mean, anyway, they're burning their brows again, David.
What's that?
They're burning their brows again. This is a kind of, for 40 years there was those EU stories about like changing the shape of a cucumber or size of a cucumber. Now it's the reverse, that they're whatever. Okay.
Well, I mean, don't trivialize the shape of the cucumber and all of that. That gave people in Britain, in the Brexit movement, the momentum to use arguments against the EU. Why are they telling us the size of their sausage, or standardizing the sausage? And the EU regulations in that context became the laughing stock of Europe, and deflected by their stupidity and bureaucratic uniformity from the larger arguments. So the size of bras or the size of sausages can be important in geopolitical terms, which is the sort of line you wouldn't necessarily want to be quoting your obituary or epitaph, you know. Anyway.
Well, this is our first morning kind of papers review, David.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Your column is on Daniel Defoe's Year of the Plague, which was let's say it. I mean, there were literally bodies on the streets, so it was a different kind of plague. But you see a lot of parallels, anyway.
Well, I mean, the parallels, just very briefly, are not so much the bodies in the street as opposed to the bodies in the hospital. The sort of things he identified, which are identifiable today, politicians lying, public disinformation, the dehumanization by the closing and opening of shops, the closing of the tavern shows, and the neglect of the poor.
And masks
and
as
who
well.
is disproportionately so le tout se change, I suppose. But I mean, you're right to upbraid me on this, and this is not the Black Death. You know, it really isn't. It's not a. And that was, exactly. Yeah, I mean, rats and things like that, and it's almost as if, I mean, there but for the grace of God go any of us, I suppose. But it's almost as if the consumer compliant culture we have today is trying to look at this as if it were the Black Death, or the flu at the end of the First World War, where more people were killed in that flu in a short space of time than the entire First World War. Yeah. So, I mean, question again of the proportionality of response to all of this, and it's been wildly disproportionate, wildly engaged in sensationalism, mismanagement, spin, and lies, and Daniel Defoe saw of,
and a lot of fear. David, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. And hopefully see you next week. And we'll look out for your column.
Hopefully.
Thank you. Thanks so much, David.
On the pot. Take care. Bye bye.
You too.
Bye.
Hang on now.
Send me the link.
I will send you the link.